what can I do to try to impress upon my colleagues, other leaders, and my team members?
At a business that does more than $1 billion in sales every year is $100 million in profits.
I've experienced it in my own way. It's clear that we have a problem.
And what do they do with all that money? They give it away to environmental activists. They give it away to conservationists. All that money is going out the door now in this radical new ownership structure.
Welcome to the second part of my conversation with David Gellis, award-winning New York Times reporter and best-selling author. After exploring how Jack Welch's leadership model at GE damaged American business culture, we now turn our attention to a more hopeful vision for the future. In this episode, David gives us a preview of his upcoming book, Dirtbag, Billionaire, how Yvon Chouinard built Patagonia, made a fortune, and gave it all away, set for release in September 2025. We'll examine how Chouinard's radical approach to business presents a compelling alternative to the Welch doctrine. Our discussion moves beyond criticism to explore constructive solutions. How can we create workplaces that serve both people and profits? What leadership models foster employee well-being while maintaining business success? And what role can conscious capitalism play in healing our fractured economic landscape? Join us as we envision a more equitable and sustainable future of work, one that benefits not just shareholders, but employees, communities, and our planet. Hi, I'm Jenny Clark, a conscious leadership expert who spent 2 decades in executive recruiting and talent management, having worked with giants like Google and Spencer Stuart. I discovered that the secret to transformative leadership lies in the 5 dimensions of conscious leadership, and I'm here to help you unlock your full potential. Join me on this channel as we embark on an honest and vulnerable journey together to become the kind of leader that genuinely inspires transformation in your organization. David, welcome back for part 2.
Thank you.
We had a great part 1 conversation. I urge everyone to watch it on the other video on my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to continue by, we talked about The Man Who Broke Capitalism, one of several books that David has written, where we looked historically at some of the contributors to ailments in the workforce that are of a grand scale. How do we move forward becomes the question.
Yeah.
And you've been around so many leaders, you've written about it, you've studied it, I've experienced it in my own way. It's clear that we have a problem. And we need not just leaders, but we need members of the workforce at large. Mm-hmm. I think part of my message is to help people understand the agency that they have in affecting change. Mm. You can't sit around and wait for some of these leaders. I don't think that they are incentivized to create change. So any advice on how do we approach some of that?
Well, the conversation we had previously was one that really looked backwards.
Yeah.
And when I think about the ground we covered, it was a multi-generational story that we told, right? From sort of this golden age of capitalism where there was a sense that companies and communities and workers were all in it together, to this highly unequal, fractured, sort of emotionally distant time we find ourselves in today.
Yeah.
In the same way that that was a multi-generational swing, I think it's going to be a long time. And I think it's a gradual journey as we try to come back to a more holistic sense of what work means to people. So all of that is to just say, there's no quick fixes. And there's going to be 2 steps forward and maybe a step or 2 back. So recognizing that and being clear-eyed about where we are and how far we have to go, I think is just sort of table stakes if we want to talk about this in a serious way.
Fair enough.
And I think it's also heartening that we can identify, and I do identify in my previous book, The Man Who Broke Capitalism, and in my next book that's just about to come out, a bunch of companies that are actually doing the good work to try to get us back to that place where work was working for everyone.
What can you preview for us from that book that will give us some hope?
Well, the next book I've got coming out is called Dirtbag, Billionaire, how Yvon Chouinard built Patagonia, made a fortune, and gave it all away. And it's really the first independent biography of Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, and the first independent telling of this extraordinary 50-year story of Patagonia, which is one of the most beloved brands in the world. We all know it from the jackets and
Yep.
bags and shorts we see everywhere. But behind that apparel company is this really extraordinary engine of activism, and not just political activism or environmental activism, though it does both of those things.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, I sort of think about this as an activist company for people.
For people. I love that. At some point in my journey since leaving Google, I decided that I wanted to be sort of a workplace activist, to activate
Yeah.
people to understand, again, the agency that they have to affect change. But tell us, if you can, preview the book with a little, give us a couple teasers as to some lessons from witnessing and studying this CEO, Yvon. Tell us more about that.
Well, it was totally an amazing honor to like spend time with him. I traveled with him all around the world. I spent tons of time with other executives from the company. So really getting a granular look inside Patagonia. And what I found was, the things that if you walk onto campus and you see today, that might make it seem like, whoa, this is a pretty cool company, right? On-site childcare. That's not just like a daycare center. This is like, it's a whole like Montessori, Waldorf level educational system we've got going on. A cafeteria that is like brimming with organic food and everyone's happy. People coming and going to the beach and surfing, and a culture that really empowers people to work on their own schedules and frankly, to work around the waves. So when the surf is up, people can often be found at the beach. A lot of those things that might strike people as like, oh, that's a cool company. These are so consistent from the way the company's been for decades now. None of this is new. All of this is rooted in how Yvon and his wife and the rest of that team understood they wanted their company to be all the way back in the 1970s. So it's so consistent. That's one of the first things I'd say. The other thing I'd say, Jenny, is that it's not just the benefits, if you will, not just the childcare and the, surf culture and the good food. Really look a layer deeper at Patagonia, and they are quietly, subtly pushing all of their suppliers in their supply chain to do the same thing.
Wow.
Maybe it doesn't mean a cafeteria and a daycare program. Yvon Chouinard and Patagonia have been trying to raise the quality of their entire supply chain for decades now. They've been pushing their suppliers, their manufacturers, the factories where their garments are sewn and dyed, even the places where the wool and the cotton is processed, to improve their labor standards, to pay their workers more. For decades now, they've understood that quality isn't just about if the garment is tough enough. It's how good is the quality of every thread in that product.
And the people who contributed to the creation and harvesting and delivery of it, so to speak.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And in fact, when Patagonia has identified suppliers in places like Vietnam or Taiwan that weren't living up to its very high standards for things like human rights and worker well-being, it stops working with those factories.
There's an incentive.
It says, we're done.
Love it.
And when a new factory wants to get Patagonia's business, Patagonia sends a special team to that factory to inspect it with an eye towards not just the quality of the fabric coming out of it, but with an eye towards human rights and worker well-being. And if those factories don't pass muster with this quality team, they don't get the job. And this is a critical piece. The team from Patagonia that makes that decision is not incentivized to approve the factory.
Okay.
Right? In a lot of companies, and I've reported on these, people in those kind of roles will actually be incentivized financially to keep the process moving along, right? You want, the Boeing wants its planes to be produced faster. So it's going to say we're going to set up a quality thing, but really at the end of the day, everyone gets bonuses if the planes get delivered faster. So guess what? The incentive structure is all about cutting corners, if that's what it takes. At Patagonia, it's the opposite.
Wow.
You get rewarded for doing the right thing.
That to me sounds like one of my favorite words in the leadership world. And when, again, I say leadership, it's everybody.
Yeah.
Accountability. As the most junior employee, I'm still accountable to someone up the chain.
That's right.
For what it is that I'm doing.
That's right.
CEOs are accountable to boards. Boards are accountable to shareholders. I mean, you're talking about an organization that understands that and is living it.
Yeah.
But it feels like it's a pretty small but influential piece. I mean, how common is this?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no one can replicate Yvon Chouinard's life. He's an extraordinary outdoorsman. He's on all these crazy adventures, which I document in the book. And no company, of course, can be just like Patagonia.
Sure.
They've got a 50-year head start on really living and breathing social and environmental responsibility in the bones of that company. And yet, I think everyone has something to learn from the way Yvon Chouinard and his team of sort of misfit capitalists have gone about shaking up the work world.
Yeah.
And every company definitely has a lot to learn from the way Patagonia has stayed true to its values. In our first conversation, we talked about the importance of having a set of values and sticking with them. And Patagonia is as good of an example as there is of what that looks like in practice over time. And yes, Patagonia is a relatively small company, but I argue that their impact has been truly outsized in the corporate world.
Good.
And you can see it not only in the numerous companies that have tried to learn from Patagonia. There's a whole chapter about the partnership they did with Walmart, of all companies. Years ago, these two companies worked incredibly closely as Walmart tried to understand what Patagonia was getting right and get some of that Patagonia DNA into the biggest retailer of them all, right? Then you look at all the other standards and organizations and workplace groups that Patagonia has helped found. Things like 1% for the planet, the Textile Exchange, all these groups that have gotten other corporations together to try to improve corporate America as a whole. Patagonia has been incredibly influential in trying to bring the rest of the business world along with it.
Yeah. Wow. I'm encouraged. Should I be?
Well, listen, I wrestle with this all the time. I'll just be honest with you, right? As a business reporter, as someone who has to cover a lot of bad news, as a reporter for the New York Times every day, it can be easy to sort of lose hope, to look at a lot of the suffering out there in the world and think like, man, business is just like not holding up its end of the bargain at the end of the day. But when I embarked on this project, I realized that, if we don't also focus on stories that give us hope, we sort of sacrifice the opportunity for meaningful change.
Agreed.
And so identifying and highlighting these stories that show, no, it's not perfect, but yes, you can try, and yes, you can make a difference in the lives of your people and in the lives of people outside your organization, that matters so much.
Yeah. Having worked for Google, so I started to ask about, and I do want to ask this because I think it could be a nice lead into another point where I want to end. Having worked for Google for almost 5 years, and before I got there, I sort of in my mind was holding out the tech sector as being one of these conscious, socially minded sectors that was going to not only be profitable, but also, take care of its people. And it shuttled people into work, and it had offered them food, and there was just all this stuff for people to do, basketball courts and machines. And so that wasn't my experience, I'll be honest. But I guess I kind of want your take on, you're offering up Patagonia and the deep dive that you did there. Patagonia was always profitable, it would seem. So profitability and their social consciousness were compatible.
These two things are not mutually exclusive. And to answer directly the question about can you be profitable and also take care of your people? Yes, absolutely. Patagonia has maintained rough profit margins of roughly 10%, which is really good for the retail business for decades now. And what that means at a business that does more than $1 billion in sales every year is $100 million in profits. And what do they do with all that money? They give it away to environmental activists. They give it away to conservationists. All that money is going out the door now in this radical new ownership structure that Yvon Chouinard came up with a couple years ago. And in the same way that profits and social responsibility aren't incompatible, it's also not enough to give people free food and basketball courts.
I mean, that's just like the biggest exclamation point I've felt in a long time. You're exactly right. What can we do? If I'm a mid-level manager in whatever kind of an organization at a nonprofit, what can I do to try to nonprofits even still have to,
Yeah.
they got to cover their expenses. What can I do to try to impress upon my colleagues, other leaders, and my team members the fact that I care, that there's hope, that we can affect change?
You're the coach. You're the coach. I don't know. So what can everyday people, mid-level managers do?
That's what I want to know.
Well, there's a billion answers to that kind of a question, right?
Yeah.
Because every organization is different and everyone's facing their own set of circumstances. But what I keep coming back to, Ginny,
Yeah.
is this notion of just staying connected
Yeah.
as humans, right?
As humans.
I told you last time we talked about this conversation I had with Elon Musk.
Yes.
Where just connecting at a human level changed the tenor of the conversation.
Mhm.
And right, that doesn't solve every problem, of course.
No.
Right? But it was enough of a reminder that in every interaction, we can't lose sight of who we are as human beings.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be hard decisions to make and there aren't going to be really difficult days in the workplace. But if we stay focused on that, I think it gives us a chance to conduct our business in ways that are ethical, that are value aligned, and that we'll feel good about at the end of the day.
And organizations can still achieve their objectives of profitability if that's the goal, right?
Absolutely. And Patagonia is one example, and I document many others in my reporting, that profits and taking good care of your people, profits and taking good care of your supply chains and your suppliers, these things are just not mutually exclusive, much as we've been told this lie that somehow they are. But if you actually focus, again, focus on the stories that show us the way forward, you can see that there's a whole bunch of ways to do well in the world while also doing some good.
I'm going to hold out hope, David Gellis. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. You're brilliant. I can't wait for your book to come out. And let's make change in the world.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.